In the latter half of the 16th century, the sacred mass and motet were coming to the end of a long period of development, and their relative importance started to decline after 1600. On the other hand, instrumental music was steadily increasing in both quantity of output and in the skill with which it was being done. During the 16th century, instrumental music became more and more independent from vocal music. Composers were learning to write idiomatically and were expanding musical forms independent of a text. One sign of the growing regard for instrumental music was the publication of books which described instruments and gave instructions for playing them. Another sign of the increasing importance of instrumental music was that more of it began to be written down. Although you'll only see wind instruments on the next slide, string instruments were common as well. Popular string instruments would include the lute, which was the most common of the household instruments. It's a stringed instrument that looks like a guitar with a body shaped like half of a pear. The ancestors to the modern violin family were called the viols. The viols differed in construction from the present-day violin in that they were fretted like a guitar. There were 6 strings, and the tone was more delicate and played without vibrato, so you get a flatter sound. Medieval and Renaissance instruments were divided into 2 groups according to the amount of volume they produced. The loud instruments, or O instruments, included trumpet, sackbut, which is the ancestor to the trombone. I love that word, sackbut. And schaum, which is the ancestor of the oboe as well as the drums. The softer instruments, the ba instruments, would include flute, recorder, fiddle, and plucked stringed instruments like the psaltery, harp, and lute. Instrumental music of the 16th century can be divided into different classes. Early on, probably the largest number of instrumental pieces were those that were derived from some kind of a vocal model. But most of it ends up being composed for dancing. It was intended for dancing. Lots and lots of dance music was being published during the 16th century. Social dancing was more widespread and more highly regarded in the Renaissance than it had ever been in Western music. Dance music was improvised in the Middle Ages, but in the Renaissance, these pieces were written out in part books. There's little or no polyphonic interplay in a dance piece. Remember, so that you wouldn't step on your partner's toes, the principal melody was sometimes ornamented. It was common for dances to be grouped in pairs or threes. These groups are the precursors of a type of piece that's going to come up later in the Baroque period called the suite. Since it was common for dances to be paired together in 2s or 3s, we have 2 examples of dances on our CDs. The first example is a pavane. That was a stately dance followed by the galliard. The galliard typically followed the pavane, which was a symmetric binary meter. The galliard, or galliard, gets its name from the French word guy or marry. And it was a leaping dance in compound meter. This became really popular in the late Renaissance. I did want to point out with the pieces that we have, it wasn't specified what instrument should play them. In the Renaissance, it was common for instruments to be built in sets or families so that one uniform timbre was available throughout the entire range from bass to soprano. It's in keeping with the ideal of a homogeneous sound mass. The consort, or complete set of 3 to 8 recorders or viols, for example, correspond to the complete family of voices ranging from bass to soprano. On these recordings, we're going to be listening to a family of schaums play the parts. As you know, during the Renaissance, it was fashionable to be educated, play an instrument, and of course, dance. To end this presentation, I want to read a quote to you from a dance treatise that was published in 1589. The treatise is cast as a dialogue between a student and a teacher. The student says, "Without knowledge of dancing, I could not please the damsels upon whom it seems to me the entire reputation of an eligible young man depends." The teacher says, "You're quite right, as naturally the male and female seek another, and nothing does more to stimulate a man to acts of courtesy, honor, and generosity than love. And if you desire to marry, you must realize that a mistress is won by the good temper and grace displayed while dancing. And there is more to it than this, for dancing is practiced to reveal whether lovers are in good health and sound of limb, after which they are permitted to kiss and touch and savor one another, thus to ascertain if they are shapely or emit an unpleasant odor as of bad meat. Therefore, apart from the many advantages to be derived from dancing, it becomes essential to a well-ordered society.